Everyone thought they knew Caitlin Clark's price. They thought there was a number so high that it would force a yes. A number so massive it would end the conversation instantly. But that assumption just collapsed, because the figure being whispered behind the scenes wasn't a few million, and it wasn't even a career-changing payday by normal standards. It was $20 million. And somehow, she still walked away. That single decision sent shockwaves through the entire basketball world. Not because athletes don't chase money, but because this kind of money has never existed like this in women's basketball. It dwarfs the lifetime earnings of most WNBA legends. It's the kind of offer that rewrites family histories. And yet, Caitlin Clark reportedly said no without hesitation. This isn't just a contract story. It's not even really about money anymore. What's happening here is far more uncomfortable for the people in charge, because this move exposed something the league has worked hard to hide. The power structure is changing, and it's changing faster than anyone expected. Stephen A. Smith didn't treat this like a rumor. He treated it like a warning. When he brought it up, the tone wasn't excitement, it was disbelief mixed with urgency. Because once a rookie realizes she doesn't need the system that employs her, the system stops being in control. And that's exactly what this looks like. Behind closed doors, this decision reportedly left WNBA leadership stunned. Not confused. Not surprised. Stunned. Because the league has spent years operating under one fundamental assumption. Players need the league more than the league needs any single player. Caitlin Clark just shattered that belief in real time. What makes this even more jarring is the timing. The WNBA is in the middle of celebrating growth, higher ratings, sold-out arenas, and the promise of massive future media deals. On the surface, everything looks healthy. But when your biggest star can casually turn down $20 million and keep moving, it exposes how fragile that growth really is. This decision also forces an uncomfortable question into the open. If $20 million wasn't enough, then what exactly is Caitlin Clark waiting for? More money? More control? Ownership? Or is this about something deeper than numbers on a contract? Because when you zoom out, this wasn't an impulsive move. It was calculated. It was quiet. And it was deliberate. There were no press conferences, no victory laps, no public statements. Just a simple rejection that instantly shifted leverage away from the league and toward one player. That's why this moment matters so much. It's not about whether the deal was tied to a rival league, private exhibitions, or equity plays. It's about what the rejection represents. For the first time, a WNBA rookie isn't negotiating from a place of gratitude. She's negotiating from a position of dominance. Stephen A. Smith has been saying for months that Caitlin Clark is bigger than the league she plays in. That she's not just a star athlete, but a brand, a business, and an economic engine all by herself. When most people heard that, it sounded exaggerated. Dramatic. Maybe even reckless. But turning down $20 million makes that argument impossible to dismiss. This is what happens when an athlete realizes her value doesn't come from salary caps, collective bargaining agreements, or league approval. It comes from attention. From influence. From fans who show up whether the logo says WNBA or not. And now the league is being forced to confront a terrifying reality. If Caitlin Clark doesn't need them, what happens next? Because this wasn't a bluff. It wasn't leverage in a negotiation. It was a statement. One that quietly said, the rules you've been using no longer apply to me. And that's where the real story begins. What most people still don't understand is that this wasn't a normal contract offer. This wasn't a team calling an agent and sliding numbers across a table. This wasn't even a traditional endorsement situation. What Caitlin Clark reportedly turned down was something far more complex, and far more dangerous to the league's control if it had gone through. The number alone distracted everyone. 20 million sounds like the headline, but the structure is where things get interesting. This wasn't just cash for games played. The whispers around this offer included long-term commitments, outside ventures, off-season obligations, and in some versions, equity tied to future revenue streams. That's not a paycheck. That's a business relationship. And that's exactly why the rejection mattered so much. For decades, women's basketball has been built on a simple hierarchy. The league controls the calendar, the salaries, the exposure, and the opportunities. Players operate inside that framework, often supplementing their income overseas or through limited sponsorships. Even the biggest stars still move within tight restrictions. This offer threatened to blur that line, because it acknowledged something the league isn't comfortable admitting publicly. Caitlin Clark operates on a different economic level. The attention she generates doesn't come from the league. It comes from fans who follow her name, not the scoreboard. It comes from sold-out arenas that were half full before she arrived. It comes from television ratings that spike the moment her games are announced. That kind of value doesn't fit neatly into a salary cap. If she had accepted a standard deal, even a massive one, it would have reinforced the idea that the league still dictates worth. By saying no, she flipped the equation. She made it clear that access to her time, image, and energy isn't automatically for sale, even at a historic price. That's what made executives uncomfortable. Because when a player turns down that kind of money, it forces everyone to admit the truth. The offer wasn't generous enough. Not in the ways that actually matter. There's also the issue of control. Any multi-year agreement comes with expectations. Appearances. Obligations. Promotional schedules. Commitments that don't care whether a player is exhausted, injured, or mentally drained. For someone who has played non-stop through college, the NCAA tournament, and straight into a professional season, rest suddenly becomes more valuable than another zero. This wasn't Caitlin Clark being greedy. It was Caitlin Clark being selective. She's already in a position where money isn't the immediate pressure point. Endorsements alone have changed that equation. When financial security is handled, the focus shifts. Legacy. Health. Ownership. Long-term leverage. Those things don't show up in headlines, but they matter far more to someone thinking 10 years ahead instead of 10 months. The other uncomfortable layer is this. If she had accepted the deal, it would have signaled that even she has a ceiling. That there's a price at which the league or outside entities can lock her in and define her role. Rejecting it does the opposite. It suggests there may not be a ceiling at all. That's why calling this turning down money misses the point entirely. She didn't reject $20 million. She rejected the idea that her future should be decided right now, under someone else's terms. And for a rookie to think like that? That's not normal. That's not how the system was designed to work. But Caitlin Clark was never designed to fit neatly into the system. Stephen A. Smith didn't break this story the way insiders usually do. There were no documents waved around, no sources say, disclaimers meant to soften the impact. Instead, he did something far more disruptive. He treated the situation as obvious. As inevitable. Like something the league should have seen coming a long time ago. 4 months, he's been building toward this moment without people fully realizing it. Every time he criticized the lack of protection Caitlin Clark receives on the court, every time he brought up travel issues, officiating inconsistencies, or the league's slow response to her rising profile, he was laying the groundwork. The message was always the same, even when he didn't say it directly. You don't treat your biggest asset like this and expect them to stay quiet forever. When he framed Clark as a corporation disguised as a point guard, it sounded exaggerated to some people. Almost disrespectful. But that framing suddenly makes sense when you realize corporations don't rush into bad deals just because the number looks big. They negotiate leverage, control, and long-term positioning. Stephen A.'s point was simple and brutal. Why would Caitlin Clark sign anything that doesn't fully reflect what she brings to the table? Not what the league can afford. Not what tradition says is appropriate. What she actually generates. He's been openly calling out the old guard of the WNBA for underestimating her influence. From charter flight debates to officiating that allows excessive physicality, he's argued that the league is behaving like Clark is just another rookie who needs to pay her dues. His response to that mentality has been blunt. You don't make a global star pay dues. You build around them. The rejected deal became proof of concept for his argument. It validated everything he's been saying. If she's willing to walk away from a historic offer, it means she already knows something the league is still struggling to accept. She holds the leverage now. And Stephen A. didn't hesitate to say what others are afraid to. The league assumed control. They assumed that because they write the contracts they write the future. But they forgot something fundamental about modern sports economics. Attention is the currency, and Caitlin Clark controls a massive share of it. When he talks about endorsement money dwarfing league salaries, he's not exaggerating for effect. He's highlighting the uncomfortable gap between what the WNBA can offer and what the market is already giving her without any league mediation. That gap makes traditional negotiation tactics useless. What really makes Stephen A's commentary land is that he's not framing Clark as rebellious or entitled. He frames her as smart, strategic, patient, someone who understands that grabbing the first massive check isn't always the winning move. He's also pointed out something that rarely gets discussed openly. The league thought it could shape her narrative, ease her in, control her exposure, let veterans set the tone. That works with most rookies. It doesn't work with someone who arrives as the main attraction on day one. By openly defending her decision, Stephen A shifted the public conversation. Instead of asking why she would say no, people started asking why the offer wasn't good enough in the first place. That's a dangerous shift for the league, because it moves scrutiny away from the player and onto the system itself. And once the system is under a microscope, everything looks more fragile. Stephen A. Smith didn't just comment on a rejected deal. He pulled the curtain back on a power struggle that the league would have preferred to handle quietly. And now that it's out in the open, there's no putting it back. Because when the loudest voice in sports media starts telling the audience that the league needs Caitlin Clark more than she needs the league, that idea doesn't just disappear. It sticks. From the outside, the WNBA looks like it's finally hitting its stride. Ratings are up. Arenas are fuller. Corporate partners are paying closer attention. On paper, this should be a victory lap moment for the league office. But behind the scenes, Caitlin Clark's reported decision has created a problem that no amount of positive press can smooth over. For Commissioner Cathy Engelbert, this isn't about one rejected offer. It's about what the rejection represents. Control slipping away. The league's entire financial future is being negotiated right now through media rights deals that are projected to be worth billions. Those projections are not built on parity or long-term brand loyalty. They are built on viewership spikes. And the biggest spike, by a wide margin, is tied to one player. When Caitlin Clark plays, networks notice. Advertisers notice. Ticket prices rise. Road games turn into events. That kind of impact gives a player leverage that no salary cap was designed to handle. And when that player demonstrates she's willing to say no, even to historic money, it sends a chilling message through the league office. Because if she's willing to walk away from $20 million over terms, what else is she willing to walk away from? That's the nightmare scenario. The idea that Clark could start prioritizing her own calendar. Skipping optional appearances. Reducing off-season commitments. Choosing rest over relentless exposure. Every one of those decisions weakens the league's grip on its biggest draw. The WNBA has always relied on a system where players need the structure. The league provides the platform, and the players fit themselves into it. Caitlin Clark reverses that dynamic. The platform follows her. That makes the salary cap feel irrelevant. It makes traditional contracts feel outdated. And it makes enforcement incredibly difficult. You can't threaten someone with lost income when they've already proven income isn't the pressure point. What makes this even more uncomfortable is the precedent it sets. If one player can operate outside the league's economic gravity, others will start asking why they can't. Not everyone will succeed, but the questioning alone destabilizes the model. Commissioner Engelbert understands that the WNBA's leverage comes from unity. From the idea that the league moves as one. Individual stars matter, but no one star is supposed to be bigger than the institution. Caitlin Clark is challenging that belief without ever saying a word publicly. There's also the fear of optics. If the public begins to see the league as unable to financially satisfy its own biggest star, it undermines every claim of growth. Every celebration of progress starts to feel hollow when contrasted with a rookie rejecting generational money elsewhere. And then there's the scheduling problem. Clark has played non-stop for years. College, tournament runs, immediate transition into the professional season. Fatigue isn't speculation. It's visible. If she decides to protect her health by scaling back, the league has no real recourse. Forcing compliance would be a public relations disaster. Allowing independence creates a slippery slope. That's the bind. Push too hard, and you risk alienating the very player driving your success. Give too much freedom, and you risk losing control altogether. The rejected deal turned that tension into reality. It wasn't just a business decision. It was a stress test. And the results weren't comforting for the people in charge. Because when the league's most valuable player shows she's not dependent on league approval, the commissioner isn't just managing contracts anymore. She's managing a potential shift in how power works in women's basketball. And that shift is happening whether the league is ready or not. The $20 million conversation doesn't exist in a vacuum. It didn't appear out of nowhere, and it certainly wasn't motivated by generosity. There was pressure behind it, and that pressure has a name the league would rather not say too loudly. Unrivaled. This new 3-on-3 league, founded by established superstars who understand the business side of basketball, represents something the WNBA has never fully had to compete with before. It's not just an alternative place to play. It's a different philosophy entirely. Shorter seasons, concentrated exposure, and most importantly, equity. That last part is what changes everything. Equity shifts an athlete from employee to stakeholder. It turns games played into long-term investment. And for players who have spent years watching leagues profit while they scrape by, that promise is irresistible. The speculation is that the massive offer Caitlin Clark turned down was, at least in part, designed to get ahead of that threat. Lock her in early. Secure the face of the sport. Prevent a rival league from instantly legitimizing itself. Because landing Caitlin Clark wouldn't just boost Unrivaled's profile. It would redefine it overnight. Networks would pay attention. Sponsors would follow. Fans would show up. That's why the numbers being floated were so aggressive. It wasn't just about her talent. It was about what she represents. But here's where things get even more interesting. If the rejected deal was tied to Unrivaled, and she still said no, it suggests something even bigger is at play. It implies that she's not simply choosing between leagues. She's weighing ownership, timing, and long-term influence. The WNBA, under its current collective bargaining agreement, cannot offer true ownership. It can offer salaries, bonuses, and exposure, but it cannot give players a seat at the table. That limitation puts it at a disadvantage in conversations with someone who is thinking like a business leader instead of a roster piece. By rejecting a massive upfront offer, Clark may be signaling that she values flexibility more than immediate reward. She's not in a rush to attach her name to any structure that limits her future options. Whether that structure is the WNBA, Unrivaled, or something else entirely. This also explains why silence has been her strategy. The longer she waits, the more leverage she gains. Every month without a signature increases speculation, pressure, and potential upside. Meanwhile, her market value doesn't drop. It grows. From the league's perspective, that's terrifying. Competition forces innovation. It forces concessions. And when a rival league starts talking openly about equity, it exposes what the WNBA can't currently provide. Even if Clark never joins Unrivaled, the mere possibility reshapes negotiations. It forces the league to confront its limitations. And it forces fans to imagine a future where the biggest stars don't need one centralized platform to thrive. The threat isn't that Caitlin Clark leaves tomorrow. The threat is that she doesn't need to choose at all. She can wait. She can watch. She can let the market come to her. That kind of patience is a luxury only the most powerful players have. And by exercising it, she's proving that her leverage isn't theoretical anymore. It's real. There's another layer to this story that numbers and contracts don't fully explain. It's the environment Caitlin Clark has been walking into every night since she turned pro. And it's something the league has been reluctant to address honestly. The physicality. The hard fouls. The hits that cross the line between competition and message sending. These moments aren't subtle, and they aren't rare. They happen in front of sold-out crowds and national cameras, yet the response has often felt muted. For a rookie carrying the league's visibility on her shoulders, that silence speaks volumes. Then there's the media tone. Before she even played her first professional game, narrative started forming that felt less like analysis and more like resistance. Records downplayed. Achievements contextualized. Comparisons framed to soften her impact. It wasn't always explicit, but it was consistent enough to notice. Stephen A. Smith has been one of the few voices willing to call this out directly. He's described it as gatekeeping, as jealousy, as an old guard uncomfortable with how fast and how loudly the spotlight shifted. When he clashed publicly with figures like Cheryl Swoops, it wasn't just about stats. It was about who gets to define greatness. For Clark, navigating that environment requires emotional energy most fans never see. Every game becomes a referendum. Every mistake magnified. Every success questioned. That wears on a player, especially one who never asked to be the center of a cultural debate. So when people ask why she wouldn't lock herself into long-term commitments, this context matters. Money doesn't fix disrespect. It doesn't soften hostility. And it doesn't protect your body when officials allow excessive contact to go unchecked. By rejecting the deal, Clark creates distance. Not just from obligations, but from politics. From narratives she didn't create and doesn't benefit from. It's a quiet refusal to be boxed into a role where endurance is expected but appreciation is conditional. This isn't about being thin-skinned. It's about boundaries. When an athlete realizes she has the leverage to say no, she can also choose the environment she participates in. She can protect her health, her image, and her mental space. There's also a symbolic element here. By not accepting a massive deal tied to league or external structures, she avoids the perception of being bought. She avoids the expectation to endure everything quietly in exchange for a paycheck. Stephen A. has framed this as a power move against narratives designed to humble her. Instead of seeking validation from veterans or media figures who question her presence, she's letting her value speak for itself. Success without approval is the most unsettling kind. This is why the rejection resonates beyond business. It feels personal, even though she hasn't said a word. It reads as a refusal to tolerate environments that demand everything while offering little protection in return. And when a player at her level decides she won't trade her peace for money, it sends a message far louder than any press release ever could. It says, respect is not optional. This moment didn't come out of nowhere. Caitlin Clark turning down $20 million only feels shocking if you haven't been paying attention to her history. Because this is not the first time she's looked at a massive offer, weighed the optics, weighed the timing, and decided patience was the smarter move. Before the WNBA season even began, there was already noise around her name. Ice Cube's Big Three League reportedly put a $5 million offer on the table for a limited number of appearances. $5 million to play a handful of games. For most athletes, that's a career-defining yes. For Clark, it was another fork in the road. She said no. At the time, critics called it a mistake. Some said she was being unrealistic. Others argued she was leaving money on the table for the sake of image or pressure from traditional basketball structures. The logic was simple. Take the money now, because there's no guarantee it will be there later. But Clark didn't move like someone chasing guarantees. She moved like someone confident in growth. Instead of jumping into short-term cash, she committed fully to her craft. She focused on her transition into the league. She let the spotlight intensify. And most importantly, she let her value compound. What was $5 million quickly turned into 10. Then into conversations about 20. That's not luck. That's strategy. Every time she delays gratification, the market responds by raising the stakes. The longer she proves she doesn't need immediate payouts, the more powerful her negotiating position becomes. It's a lesson usually reserved for CEOs and investors, not rookie athletes. This pattern also exposes a massive disconnect inside the league. While veteran players are fighting for incremental raises and modest contract improvements, Clark is negotiating in a completely different financial universe. Thousands versus millions. Salaries versus equity. Survival versus ownership. That gap creates tension, whether people want to admit it or not. It's uncomfortable to watch someone arrive and leapfrog a system others have spent years navigating. But discomfort doesn't change reality. It just highlights it. Stephen A. Smith has called this a masterclass in business awareness. He's pointed out that most athletes are trained to grab the bag the moment it appears, because history tells them opportunities are fragile. Clark is rewriting that script. She's betting that her relevance isn't fleeting. And so far she's been right. The more she waits, the louder the conversation becomes. The louder the conversation, the higher the offers climb. That's how leverage works when you're the one driving demand. This also explains why the league struggles to contain the moment. You can't discipline patience. You can't find confidence. And you can't pressure someone who has already proven she's willing to walk away. Clark isn't rejecting money out of arrogance. She's rejecting timelines that don't serve her. She's choosing growth over comfort. And in doing so, she's exposing how unprepared the system is for a player who doesn't operate out of fear. That's why this doesn't feel like a one-off decision. It feels like a continuation of a philosophy. One built on self-belief, restraint, and an understanding that true power comes from knowing when not to say yes. And the most unsettling part for the league is this. Every time she's made this bet, she's won. There's a reason Caitlin Clark can afford to think differently than most players, and it has nothing to do with ego. It has everything to do with security. Real security. The kind that removes desperation from decision-making entirely. Nike changed the equation. When reports surfaced about her signature deal, estimated around $28 million, it quietly altered the power dynamic in women's basketball. That contract didn't just put money in her account. It bought freedom. Freedom from urgency. Freedom from pressure. Freedom from having to say yes just to feel safe. Endorsement deals like that don't operate on the same logic as league contracts. They're built on visibility, influence, and long-term brand alignment. Nike didn't invest in Caitlin Clark because of her WNBA salary. They invested because her name moves product. Her highlights circulate without league promotion. Her fanbase follows her, not the logo on her jersey. That reality is what gives her what people in business call walk-away power. When you can walk away, negotiations change completely. Suddenly, the leverage flips. The person with the most options controls the conversation. Stephen A. Smith has emphasized this point repeatedly. He said that Clark is the first female basketball player who exists as her own economy. Ticket sales, ratings, merchandise, social engagement. All of it spikes around her presence. The league benefits from that, but it doesn't own it. This is why turning down $20 million doesn't signal recklessness. It signals independence. When your financial foundation is already solid, every additional offer is evaluated differently. It's no longer about survival or even success. It's about alignment. Does this help me long-term? Does it protect my health? Does it give me control? Does it respect my value? If the answer is no, the money doesn't matter. That's a terrifying concept for a league that has always relied on financial necessity to maintain structure. Historically, players needed the league to stabilize their careers. Clark doesn't. She can rest. She can wait. She can choose. Nike also insulates her from backlash. If she skips opportunities, critics can't frame it as greed or ingratitude. The narrative collapses when the audience knows she's already set. The conversation shifts from, why won't she take the money, to, why isn't the system good enough? And that's the real disruption. Not the dollar amount. The mindset. This endorsement safety net allows Clark to prioritize her body after years of non-stop play. It allows her to avoid overexposure. It allows her to say no without fear of being labeled difficult or ungrateful, because the market has already validated her worth. The league didn't just underestimate her popularity. It underestimated how quickly financial independence would change her posture. Once that switch flips, players stop chasing approval and start setting terms. Nike gave Caitlin Clark that switch. And once it's flipped, there's no turning it back. One of the most revealing moments in this entire saga didn't involve contracts or endorsements at all. It was the Olympic roster decision. When Caitlin Clark was left off Team USA, the explanation sounded familiar. She needed experience. The chemistry wasn't right. The timing wasn't ideal. On the surface, it was framed as a basketball decision. But the reaction told a different story. Stephen A. Smith immediately called it out as a miscalculation. Not because Clark was entitled to a spot, but because the decision completely misunderstood her position in the sport. The assumption seemed to be that leaving her off the roster would humble her. That it would remind her she still needed the system. That it would reinforce who was in charge. Instead, it did the opposite. The snub gave her something far more valuable than a gold medal run. It gave her rest. After years of non-stop basketball, it removed a massive physical and mental burden. It also gave fans time to miss her. And when fans miss you, demand doesn't drop. It explodes. Her absence didn't cool the hype. It intensified it. Discussions about her dominance didn't stop. They shifted. Instead of game-by-game analysis, the conversation became about potential. About what she could do if unleashed. About how strange it felt to exclude the most magnetic player in the sport from its biggest stage. That decision unintentionally reinforced the idea that traditional gatekeepers were out of sync with reality. The sport's visibility was being driven by someone they chose not to showcase. And fans noticed. From a leverage standpoint, it was a gift. Clark lost nothing and gained everything. She avoided additional wear on her body, avoided the pressure of international scrutiny, and emerged with her mystique intact. By the time the season rolled on, her value hadn't dipped. It had risen. This is why the $20 million rejection hits harder in context. The Olympic decision showed her something important. She doesn't need institutional validation to remain relevant. The machine doesn't create her star power. It reacts to it. Stephen A. Smith has used this moment as evidence that attempts to check Clark simply don't work. Every effort to contain her seems to amplify her instead. Every gate closed in her face becomes another spotlight. The Olympic snub was supposed to reinforce hierarchy. Instead, it exposed fragility. It showed that the league and its partners still think in old terms, while Clark operates in a new reality. And when you combine that realization with financial independence and outside options, you get a player who doesn't feel pressure to conform. You get someone who can afford to wait, to choose selectively, and to reject deals that don't serve her long-term vision. Leaving her off the Olympic team didn't diminish Caitlin Clark. It clarified her position. She's not chasing platforms anymore. They're chasing her. Caitlin Clark's decision doesn't stop with her. That's what makes it so dangerous for the league. The moment a player at the center of the sport proves that saying no is possible, everyone else starts watching more closely. Other young stars are already learning different rules. Players like Angel Reese, who command massive online followings and endorsement attention, are discovering that the court is no longer the only place value is created. Social platforms, brand deals, private appearances, and direct-to-fan engagement are opening doors that didn't exist a decade ago. The league is no longer the sole gateway to relevance. Clark is the proof of concept. If she can turn down $20 million and still control the conversation, it forces other players to rethink their own leverage. Not everyone will have her reach or her deals, but the mindset spreads anyway. Players begin asking why they're grinding through brutal schedules, constant travel, and limited pay when attention can be monetized elsewhere. That's where the dominoes start to wobble. The WNBA has always depended on a shared understanding that the league comes first. Individual branding was secondary. Sacrifice was part of the culture. But Clark's rise disrupts that balance. She shows that individual gravity can outweigh institutional authority. This puts the league in a difficult position. Cracking down on individual freedom would look punitive. Allowing full independence risks fragmentation. And doing nothing allows the idea to grow unchecked. Stephen A. Smith has hinted at this ripple effect repeatedly. He's warned that once players realize they don't have to play by outdated rules, the system starts to erode from the inside. The old model relies on dependency. Clark represents independence. Even veterans feel it. Watching a rookie generate millions while they fight for incremental raises creates resentment, tension, and uncomfortable truths. It forces the league to confront an economic reality it hasn't solved yet. Star power is not evenly distributed, and pretending otherwise doesn't make it fair. The danger isn't rebellion. It's disengagement. If top-tier talent begins viewing the WNBA as just one option among many, the league loses its leverage. Scheduling becomes harder. Commitment becomes negotiable. And the idea of paying dues starts to sound outdated. Clark's decision didn't create this shift. It revealed it. She didn't call for change. She demonstrated it. And that's far more powerful. Because once people see a path exists, even if they can't follow it exactly, the old road stops feeling mandatory. The league is now facing a generation of players who understand branding, timing, and leverage in ways previous eras couldn't. Caitlin Clark just accelerated that learning curve. And once the dominoes start falling, there's no way to neatly stack them back up again. When people look back on this moment, they're going to misunderstand it if they focus on the number. 20 million makes for a clean headline, but it's not the story. The story is that Caitlin Clark reached a point in her career faster than anyone expected. A point most athletes never reach at all. She realized she doesn't need permission. She doesn't need league approval to matter. She doesn't need traditional structures to validate her value. She doesn't even need the biggest check on the table if it comes with limitations she doesn't want. That realization is rare, and it's dangerous to systems built on control. Stephen A. Smith sees this for what it is. Not arrogance. Not rebellion. Evolution. The sport has changed, the media landscape has changed, and the economics have changed. Caitlin Clark is simply the first women's basketball player powerful enough to force everyone else to catch up. The WNBA should be shocked. Not offended. Not defensive. Shocked. Because this moment exposes the gap between growth narratives and reality. Between celebrating progress and actually rewarding the player driving it. Between talking about empowerment and allowing real autonomy. This isn't a negotiation tactic. It's a warning shot. If Caitlin Clark is willing to say no to $20 million right now, imagine the leverage she'll have when her rookie contract ends. Imagine the options she'll have when she's fully rested, fully healthy, and even more established. The league won't be negotiating from strength then. It'll be negotiating from necessity. And that raises an uncomfortable question no one wants to answer yet. What happens if she decides the WNBA, as it currently exists, isn't worth the trade-offs anymore? What happens if she chooses exhibitions, private leagues, ownership plays, or something entirely new? This isn't the end of the WNBA. But it might be the end of the WNBA operating the way it always has. Caitlin Clark didn't threaten change. She embodied it. Quietly. Effortlessly. Without asking anyone for permission. The power has shifted. Not because she demanded it, but because she earned it. And the most important part of this story isn't whether she'll eventually sign a massive deal. She will. The real question is who will be negotiating from a position of strength when that moment comes. Because for the first time, it might not be the league. If you found this breakdown valuable and want more deep dives like this into the business, power shifts, and hidden dynamics shaping sports right now, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's next. Like the video if this gave you a new perspective, and leave a comment with your thoughts on Caitlin Clark's move. Was it genius, risky, or inevitable? Your engagement directly helps the channel grow, and it lets us keep bringing you high-quality analysis like this.